Hello, Michelle. It's so lovely to be across the screen from you and having this conversation. We are friends from way back and developed a beautiful friendship back when Beren, your oldest child, was a little baby. And I think you were coming to the home birth coffee groups that I was running in my place because I had little ones then too, or a little one, maybe two. And we got really kind of involved in running aspects of the Waikato Home Birth Association meetings and gatherings and story sharing sessions and all sorts, which was just epic. And and then yeah, I had the honor and privilege of being invited to attend your second birth, Willis's birth, to come and help out with Beren, which was just amazing. And I'm sure we will talk more about this as the episode goes on. Um, but as well, you have your story and Beren's story in my birth book and where the heart is. And so I realized, well, actually, you opened my eyes up to the fact that I don't have any breech birth stories on my podcast as yet until now, right? Like, we're going to get to hear the story of Beren's birth, which was a surprise breech birth story, and Willis's birth, and all about your breastfeeding journey with your boys, which provided some pretty big challenges for you. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And let's just get right into it and tell us about, well, you birthed both your boys at home. And, you know, it's fairly unusual for first-time parents, first-time mothers to choose to birth their baby at home. How did you come to that place where you wanted to birth your first baby at home?
It's a good place to start, isn't it? First of all, thank you for having me, and hi. It's great to see you, Carla. And it's awesome to be doing this because I haven't actually verbalized the births and the breastfeeding journeys. I've done a lot of writing on them, but not conversational recordings like this. So it's a real honor. And yes, let's start where it starts, I suppose, which is that I just feel really incredibly lucky that we ended up on a home birth pathway, because there was really no precedent. There was no family history of birthing at home on my side or on Sean, my husband's side. We were not in a circle of people who had paved that way and shown us that it can be a part of life. We were very happily pregnant, and it was in early pregnancy that we knew we needed to find a midwife. And then we joined a few dots in our head, and we realized that we knew a midwife. So we knew our midwife's partner, Sean, and her partner were long-term friends. And so we reached out and said, hey, can we have a chat? And she was delighted, you know, a friend. She'd been at our wedding, and I didn't know her particularly well, but we had spent one weekend together, like a few years before we had fallen pregnant. And that's when I'd really heard her talk about her work. And I'd been, you know, quite captivated that weekend because I'd never heard a midwife speak about her work before. So it was a really up close, awesome, intense weekend of woman to woman chatting before I was even thinking about being a mother myself. Anyway, we reached out, and because her practice doesn't involve a clinic, we were just at her home. And after we'd all sat down and had a great big hug, she just said outright, you know, have you thought about where you'll have your baby? And it was Sean that said, he sort of turned to me and he said, oh, I think at home. Hey, Michelle. And it was his answer that set the whole thing in motion. And I was quite taken aback because we had not had a conversation about place of birth. And we knew that Dee was a midwife who practiced in a way that was highly supportive of home birth, but we still hadn't, as a couple, as a mother and father in that new journey talked about it, but he was just so confident. And I just sort of went, and and that was that. And what I loved about the fact that we obviously ended up choosing to work with Dee as our midwife is that relationship that she had with Sean, and that click that was there. We did meet with one other midwife who was recommended by friends, and she was perfectly lovely, but there was nothing like the connection that Dee was able to establish with Sean, because there was already something there to work with. And he loves her as much as I do. There was just this incredible three-way partnership thing that emerged. And then, as the pregnancy progressed and we got to the day that our baby was born, a lot of beautiful things played out between them as the support people to me as the birthing mother. I mean, in my eyes, they're such a magical, important part of how both of my births have unfolded. I really do want this conversation today to do justice to the part that they each played. But her, choosing a home birth midwife at the time, I don't think I could have known then until many years later quite what that means. But I'm really clear now. I'm quite fortunate to be literate in the way of birth and the world of birth, and I know what it means to have a home birth midwife, and I consider myself so fortunate. And I also feel fortunate to have birthed at the time I did. Many years have gone by. The boys are big now, and the landscape's different. It's difficult out there in a range of different ways. I know you cover really well with the people that you speak to. I feel really lucky that at that time here in our region, we were very blessed with a strong community of awesome midwives, and I was lucky to benefit from that support. And it was one of the reasons why our paths crossed, and you just feel like you want to give back a little bit to support other people to get some of that magic. And I've recommended home birth midwives to so many women over the years, and had some really successful stories of women just having a little bit of that magic from the care that you get when you're with a midwife who's just thinking about things in a really woman-centered way, and in a really in a way that is just so gentle, and will be very affirming of the way you want your birth to look. And all of that fed into early pregnancy and this sort of sense. Shall I just carry on talking about?
Yeah, go for it. And before you do, I love that you're speaking into the importance of the relationship that you have with your midwife. And you're right, when you were pregnant with Beren and Willis, times were different. How old are the two boys now?
So this year, in a few months, they will turn 14 and 12.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that in my work over the years, because I've been in this birth trauma support role for a little more than 10 years now, that when I'm working with women who have experienced a traumatic first birth and they're pregnant again, we talk about the importance of things like birthplace and who you have present at your birth, who's going to be supporting you in your pregnancies. And there was always this wealth of incredible home birth midwives who I just had absolute confidence in recommending to people who were like, actually, I think I need to switch midwives, or I want a midwife like that. And it's so hard that I'm in a place now where there are fewer and fewer midwives who are practicing in this very women-centered, loving, compassionate, gentle way where they're taking time. And part of this is, midwives are under the pump. They are in a different climate now, and it is really, really tough. And part of it is that we have lost a lot of our home birth midwives, especially during the mandates. And part of it is I think, just the growing, the ever increasing medicalization of birth, and it's impacting the midwives that are coming through the training. Oh, so it is tough times, but yeah, please do, like, I'm sure it will come through in your story, but share what that relationship, the importance of that relationship, and how it impacted your birth and postpartum, your breastfeeding experiences. But yeah, tell us about your birth with Beren.
I will. So yeah, I suppose just to take that lead a little bit more, Carla. You know, being pregnant and having support along the way looked like every visit in the home, looked like massive long conversations, looked like lending lots of amazing books and you know, videos on old cassette tapes, and that's how old we're talking here. It looked like Sean involved at every visit. If there was a reason he couldn't be there, we'd try and reschedule. You know, he was so fully involved in all the conversations we were having along the way. It looked like every milestone or option that we arrived at being a fully informed conversation where consent was, you know, we were beginning to already explore that. Would you like to do this? You know, here's the information, you're going to make the decision. So it was real sort of training and preparation in disguise. And then some conversations about parenthood ahead, and a few sort of seeds planted about the choices and the things that you encounter after you've given birth. And I, you know, she would encourage me to sort of do things that felt good for me. And so I was going to pregnancy yoga, which at that time I was also so fortunate to be attending classes. Another home birth midwife ran those classes. And so I was having, you know, really physical weekly sessions of movement that were very focused on things that helped during labor, as well as also just being a space where I just felt really pregnant, you know, and was in a room of other pregnant women, not just sort of almost pretending I wasn't pregnant every day when I was going to work. You know, I felt very visible and very, very happy to be going along to those weekly classes. It was easy to prioritize that because I had no other commitments in my life. I stayed really active. I was riding my bike a lot. And I was thinking about positioning. I hired a kneeling chair for work instead of sitting on an office chair. You know, there were a lot of little seeds planted. I started to become, with definite encouragement from our midwife, quite good at guarding my space. So I worked in a really mainstream workplace at the time, and people were starting to you know, hear that we were planning a home birth. And I started to also become aware that everybody wants to tell you their birth story or their cousin's sister's birth story, or and I've never been a particularly, at that time I wasn't a particularly I was a bit of a people pleaser in a lot of ways, but I had this new voice that was really beginning to emerge because of this encouragement to protect my space and to realize that my birth was going to be my birth. And I would stop people, and I would just sort of put my hand up like this and just say, I'll just stop you there. And it was this like new voice that I hadn't had that confidence before. Everybody wanted to know the sex of our baby. We didn't have a 20-week scan. We were making different choices. You know, people began to be aware that, oh, okay, she's doing things a bit differently. We were having a baby, and I used to say really bluntly, oh, we're having a baby. And I refused to, you know, join in with the expectation that people could know whether to buy pink or blue, or, you know, yeah. So there was a mark, I guess. People were like, okay. And then I think people also then think, I wonder how this is going to play out for them. So I guess you're right to say that not many first-time parents choose to home birth. It is certainly, yeah, I suppose it isn't the first way that people, they got, and I met so many mums and parents and couples afterwards that came to home birth as a solution to the first birth that they had been through, and wanting to find something that was gentler and more private and more healing. So, okay, that takes us to, late pregnancy, everything good. Got to 40 weeks, everything good, felt really comfortable. 41 weeks, everything good. I was at home, I had stopped work, I was preparing and enjoying all this bonus time, wasn't worried, totally comfortable. We were quite keen at that point to meet our baby, and it was Easter weekend was coming up, so we decided to go and walk up some really steep hills. We had sex. I walked along the curb with one foot in the curb and 1 foot high. I was trying to like do all the things that you do to try and get your baby moving. That was Good Friday, and so in the middle of the night between Friday and Saturday, I started to feel something that woke me. And then because I'd never had any Braxton Hicks, I had no idea whether this might be it or not too sure. By the morning, we sort of started to know that labor was underway, and we reached out to tell our midwife. And sort of later in the morning, I was starting to get quite grumpy, and I wanted the house really quiet. And I'd backed myself into the corner of the lounge. So I was finding it really interesting that all of these things I'd read, I really loved reading Michel Audin, and the French, he's an obstetrician, but so anyway, he wrote a lot about sort of primitive birth conditions that are also really optimal for any woman to be birthing. So dark and private and quiet, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I was sort of facing the room, but the back of me was, facing into a corner, and I was leaning over a chair, and I was just enjoying not much talking. And this time our midwife had come over just to check and see what was going on. And I was sort of, things were progressing and contractions were going smoothly and all was well. We filled the pool, and I did hop in the pool, and the contractions in the pool were feeling good. And then I was really starting to feel the change and then strengthening, and me not being able to sort of follow my own sort of plan in my head to try and stay open through contractions. So at that time, I was trying to sort of moan in a way that was low. I was not gripping the sides of the pool. I was trying to turn my hand up and like try and consciously relax my fingers, but that was getting tough. I didn't really know how to move with it. So I think from the notes that we've got, I think it says in that section that it was towards the last few contractions like that they started to see some meconium in the pool, in the water, and my own poos as well, from the pressure of the contractions. And it wasn't pushing actively by that stage, but I couldn't quite figure out what I was meant to do next, but I wasn't worried. So, the suggestion was that I come out the pool in between contractions, hop on the birth mat, which was laid out right beside the pool, this enormous, amazing creation that Sean had made, and just try some contractions with gravity, without the support of the water, to see how they'd feel. And those contractions definitely saw more meconium coming down onto the birth mat. And I don't really remember twigging what that meant at that time. But that's cool. It felt a little bit different to be out the water, and I was sort of in a bit of a, like holding the edge of the pool. And I think I was sort of maybe leaning down into a squat or something. It says in the notes that it was at that time that we'd seen more meconium coming down onto the mat, that the midwife asked if she could perform a vaginal examination. And I knew that her request to do that would have come about after much thought and much consideration. I knew that she would have had no intentions of, performing a VE unless she had a reason to. And so she suspected that maybe we were dealing with a little baby that was coming out breech, and that the squeezing of the breech position was forcing his meconium into the world. So yeah, sure enough, she performs a VE, and she confirms to the room. By this time, we had a second midwife in attendance as well, that she could feel a bottom. And it was that at that point that it just shifted. It shifted in a way that was obviously way more of a thing for them than for me. So my memories of that are, oh, okay. And then another contraction would have come along to fully consume all of my thought. And
Michelle, can I just interrupt momentarily just to ask, was breech birth something you had talked about in pregnancy, or was this your first conversation? It's not really a conversation.
Yeah, like I don't remember us having absolute conversations about, and if we find out through your pregnancy that your baby is laying in a breech position, this is what we could do. I don't remember that, but I do know that I would have read about it, and I would have read about things that are optimal to turn a breech, and things that you could do before you're going to birth. Obviously, because that is everybody's hope, is that you turn a breech so you don't birth a breech. And I knew about, oh my gosh, her name's just gone out of my head, Maggie Banks. And I either had read but definitely knew about her work in trying to retain knowledge of breech birth amongst midwives and birth practitioners.
Yeah, she published a book called Breech Birth Woman Wise. Beautiful book.
Yeah. And I don't know whether it was that book that I knew about, but I think I'd heard about the Broken Weave, or another book.
It's called Home Birth Bound, Mending the Broken Weave.
Yeah.
Publication of hers, and again, another fabulous book. Yeah.
I feel like I read it after I birthed Beren. That seems logical, because I don't think I knew much about breech birth. But like I say, it just didn't register and cause a reaction in me.
Yeah.
I was quite busy laboring, thank you very much. I was just really carrying on. So I think the notes say that there were a couple more contractions. Obviously, baby's heart rate began to be something that was recorded with each contraction. And then we had some discussions. So I remember Dee talking to me about options, and I remember Dee then asking me specifically to basically state my wishes about what are we going to do here, Michelle. And I asked a few more questions. I was able to ask a few more questions in between contractions about what would it mean if we did, call an ambulance, what's possibly likely to happen. And then when she answered that question, I just said, I remember checking in with myself. I remember thinking, how do my quads feel? Because I was out the pool and my legs were doing the work. And I remember thinking, no, I'm good. And I just said, no, we're good. We're staying here. And so we just got quite active. She became a very active midwife. She was crouching beside me. She was making me, make the most of every single contraction. We were pushing. We were trying to stay really low with it, instead of wanting to sort of rise up and away from the intensity. And within half an hour from the VE, we had a baby. So it was we worked and we birthed him, but he was really close. Like, he was right there. So at the time that she did the VE, he was about an inch away from fresh air. So, there wasn't a whole lot more to do, you could say. And I honestly don't, my recollections of his birth and labor are that it was labor. It was work. It was physical work, but it was, there was no transition. It was just steady. It was just, like, it got going and then it got going and it got, really intense and hard towards the end, but it didn't it didn't feel like Willis's birth. It felt really different. It was just steady labor. And I worked really hard to birth my baby at home when I knew that he was coming out breech. And we did it. So he was in extended breech. You know, bottom came out first, then one leg slithered down, another leg slithered down. At that time, they could obviously see his sex, and it was a confirmation because we had this huge hunch that he was a boy. So we had, you know, his male half dangling, and then his head was born, came out to chest, and then his head was born. And what was interesting with his birth was that at the time that his head was birthed, Sean saw blood sort of just spurt across the birth mat, and the cord was nicked somehow, but at that point. And so we ended up with a partially torn cord, lots of it intact, and it just sent, you know, bright red blood from corner to corner on the birth mat. It was really interesting. And then they sort of, Dee and Sean together caught him like a bar of soap, and he was, you know, he was here. And I managed to put my legs down and sort of sat down and relaxed, and we had this enormous baby who'd been birthed, and I was just like absolutely on a high. I just felt incredible. I felt so powerful, and the whole room just sort of took a breath, and we were good. He was, you know, he was a little quiet when he first came out. His AGPAR goes like 7, 8, 10 over the first 10 minutes. So he took a little while to sort of, you know, wake up to everything. He'd had a huge workout as well. We hopped back in the pool to sort of slosh around and wash off together, and then we were on the couch, and I birthed the placenta on the couch. I think that was, you know, 40 minutes later, something like that. No more. And yeah, I was full of all of those beautiful hormones that were coursing through me, because nothing had interrupted their flow and their process. And I felt like I hadn't torn. I was on a cloud 9 high. I was like, look at me. You know, I wasn't saying that. I was not really aware at that time, I suppose, that I had done something so unusual. I think that dawned on me over the next few weeks.
How big was Beren, Michelle?
He was 4.55 kilos, I think, which is like just over 10 pounds, 10 pound one, something like that. Yeah, so he looked really sizable. And he looked also like he'd been breech for a while. So his legs were really folded up like a little frog.
Oh, were they? So
Yeah.
Oh, complete breech. So yeah, where the legs are folded rather than the frank breech where they're up.
Yeah,
Right.
so he wasn't, yeah, he was sort of knees to chest was
Right.
how he wanted to lay. And it took him a really long time to sort of relax out of that. So yeah, that's the birth bit.
Can you share about, like you said that the cord must have been nicked as his head was birthed by the sound?
That's what Sean saw. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the implications or significance of that? What happened in relation to that?
We didn't do anything. We had planned delayed cord clamping. We left that plan intact, and we changed nothing. We could still see, I think, 2 of the 3 vessels of, you know, so we just left it be and didn't change our plan. I can't remember how long it was before Sean clamped and cut, but it was a while, because we had absolutely firm knowledge that that was a great thing to do, and we saw no reason to change that. We saw that, you know, we were still working with 2 out of 3 vessels going along. And then Sean prepared some of the placenta, so that was another plan that we'd made. So he took away the placenta to the kitchen, and he prepared a piece of it into really small sort of pill-sized pieces that we froze. The rest of it we used to plant a tree for our boy. But the little frozen pill-sized pieces, I just popped one of those in my mouth with water and took one a day until they were all gone. So we had that plan to consume some of the placenta. So yeah, that's kind of where we got to. A little later in the evening, he was born about 6 o'clock, and a bit late, a few hours after, Dee was able to tell me that I had actually torn. So we did have a really good chat about that. It was a 2nd-degree tear, and she was really happy with how it was sitting, and I was really comfortable for us to let that heal, and I'm so happy with that choice. So I took a lot of care of that tear, and honestly, the healing of that as well is just it was such a positive, and just makes you marvel at the body, just to sort of watch my body repair that all by itself with a tiny bit of support, and a little bit of self-care, but it wasn't too onerous, and it felt so much nicer than the idea of having to go somewhere to be stitched.
Can I ask a couple of questions around this? Because I know that tearing is a fear of a lot of first-time mothers and second-time mothers if they had a traumatic birth, and tearing or an episiotomy, being cut, was a part of that experience. Yeah, did you feel when you tore? Like, I'm guessing the answer is no, because you sounded completely oblivious to that there could have even been a tear until Dee, checked it out and advised you that that was the case. But yeah, did you get the ring of fire? What was pushing out an over 10-pound baby like for you in terms of the sensations? And also, what did you do? Like you said, you didn't need to do much. It was amazing how your body healed itself. But actually, a lot of times the body doesn't heal itself so well, dependent on the state of the mother, right? So I kind of hear these stories from women who have had traumatic births, who have a lot of problems with their episiotomy healing or their tear healing, and complications associated with that, which suggests to me that that was because their overall health wasn't great to support the body to be able to heal. I mean, stress, lack of sleep, all those things that go with a traumatic birth experience are going to inhibit the ability of the body to do the healing work. But what did you do that supported your healing?
Yeah, no worries. I didn't feel the tear, and I didn't feel, because I have also birthed a head down baby, it wasn't the ring of fire sensation with birthing Beren in his Breech presentation. It was just intense pressure around that whole area, pushing more into my bum more than anything. So it felt really different to birthing a head. That's all I can say, having felt both. But like I say, I could not feel that specific moment when my skin just went, actually, we can't hold on any longer. And I know I don't want to be dismissive about it. I want to try and sound positive about it, because it was really no big thing for me. Yeah. And I just remember, I suppose because I had just done what I'd done, I felt pretty confident that this next part was going to be as it was meant to be, in a way too. Like I was working from a place of confidence in my body, and I definitely was careful to follow Dee's advice about what good self-care would look like for that tear. I definitely didn't want to risk a complication, of course. I was, as we'll get to, I was in a real place of stress. I was working on poor sleep. I definitely was being well nourished and well cared for. And I was doing a lot of things to try and make sure that my poos were soft. And the last thing you want is to be constipated. You know, I had good general health awareness of how to look after myself, but I couldn't really control the stress and the sleep and the worry of the days that followed because of the breastfeeding. But the self-care part looked like frozen pads, you know, that were sprinkled with a hypercal solution, a diluted hypercal solution, poured onto disposable sanitary pads and frozen. They were very soothing to wear in my undies. We used a medical grade Manuka honey, which was sort of a smear on the area. And then the other thing that we did was what's called a sitz bath, where you sort of make a sling of cling film or glad wrap over your toilet bowl, and then you pour a sort of a watery hypercal dilution, and you basically sit in it. So you're soaking the area in a healing solution. You sit still as long as you can. You know, when there's babies in the house, you may not get 15 minutes, but you can sit in it as much as you can. And so it was those three things that were the main tools. And the other advice was to keep my legs together, you know, not to sit cross-legged, not to do anything that might risk reopening it, or you just wanting to let it sit together and do its thing, and let the tissues find one another again and knit themselves back together. And honestly, that's my experience. That's what happened for me. And I have like no trace of a tear. It healed really, really well. And I was very grateful for that as well. It was another, because I experienced such a lot of sadness that my body wasn't doing what I wanted it to do when it came to feeding my baby. My body gave me really positive signals that it birthed a baby really well and it healed a tear really well. And that was a lot of comfort when things were going to shit with feeding. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a second degree tear with my first baby as well. She was big too, a little smaller than Beren, but not far off. She was 4.80 grams, 9 pound 14. And I chose not to have any stitches as well. Something that I remember finding really helpful was having a jug next to the like a little plastic jug next to the toilet that I would try and fill with warm water if I could hold my wee long enough. But if I couldn't, then it would be cold water in there. But to pour that down over myself whilst I was weeing would stop the stinging, the stinging of the urine on the wound. Yeah. Just saying that so that other people who are listening, if you know, all the tips are helpful, eh?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So you have already alluded to the complications that you had with feeding Beren. Start us off from his first feed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had no warning that we were going to encounter problems. And but I feel now like I put not a great deal of thought into looking further into breastfeeding. I just worked on an assumption that I would be able to, and it didn't pan out like that. And that was a real grief and a real sort of why did I not think about this before? I think I was really birth focused. But anyway, suddenly you've got this baby, and then it's awkward to know how to hold him. And because he had been born breech and his little legs were so sort of crunched up, he wasn't sort of laying across me very easily. And we were figuring out which way to put him on. He kind of wanted to, but he wasn't like ravenous, and he wasn't, really sort of looking for the breast. He was and he wasn't, it wasn't, I didn't know what that meant or what clues to look for. So we tried football hold, and that was kind of the most successful thing. And he latched and sort of looked comfortable. And I think he sort of got a bit sleepy, and that was that. And then a few hours after birth, when we were sort of cozy and in bed, our midwife left us, and then she came back in the morning. And it's a real blur, to be honest, Carla, but he wasn't very settled. He was, there'd be sort of snatches, and then he'd wake and he'd be upset, and then we'd be trying to feed him. And I didn't know what a good latch felt like. I was just sort of trying things. And I think I had tried to see if I could squeeze some colostrum out of my breast when I was in late pregnancy. I don't know where I'd heard that idea, but there was sort of nothing much to be seen. Like, we weren't talking volumes. But I didn't really think about that. And I didn't think that was particularly an indicator. But basically, we sort of saw a few days go by of this baby not really seeming very settled. And I was exhausted and feeling worried, and also just so overwhelmed at the arrival. It's silly, isn't it? You're having a baby, but then you've actually got a baby. I just didn't really quite know what to do with any of it. And it was on the fourth day that our midwife felt his fontanelle at the top of his head, and she could feel that the fontanelle was depressed, so it was sort of sunken. And I don't remember her asking me about nappies that time, but years later I knew a lot more about nappies and what to look for. But it was the fontanelle particularly, and she said to me just really gently, what if we give him a little bit of formula and see if that settles him? And I was just absolutely heartbroken. I was just I think I still am. So we gave him 20 mils of the sort of the very early infant mix, and then he slept. And so then we knew, okay, we've got to do some stuff here. So that's where Dee became phenomenal for the second time, because she introduced us to the idea that we could actually ask some women with an oversupply of breast milk to be donors for us. And she had plenty of people that she could think of. And I had never thought of anything like that in my life. But my first thought was, hell yes, let's find some milk from a mother. So we entered into this strange new world of Sean driving around Hamilton with little containers of milk from other women, and returning clean containers, and knocking on strangers' houses, and Dee would bring some from other women that she had known or was caring for, and I didn't care where it was coming from. I just preferred it immensely to the idea that my baby was going to have to drink formula. And we were also, I saw a lactation consultant. I started domperidone. I was pumping. And to be honest, all of that felt fruitless. Nothing seemed to bring my milk in. I was in this sort of place where I was mix feeding my baby, and it felt like he only settled when he drank formula or milk from other women. Sometimes he was fussy about milk from other women, but not much. And it felt like he settled when he took it from a bottle and he could have his fill. And it felt like feeding him from my breast it felt like it was the least effective thing that we were doing. And yet I wanted him to, get into it. But I knew we were fighting, the luxury of the bottle and all the effects that it can have, because it's just, consistent, and it was feeding him a lot when he wanted to feed a lot. So yeah, that was really tough. And it definitely dulled a lot of the joy, but I had a lot of the joy of the birth, because by then people were kind of aware that I'd had this unusual birth. So I was sort of simultaneously having a lot of visits and a lot of celebration, but I was in really low place as well. And I had to sort of, when I accessed memories of the birth, it was very helpful because it made me feel amazing. But my daily reality was, how do I settle this baby? This is just so tough. I am so tired. How do I do this in a way that's responsive to him? And I was doing the new mother thing. I had the diary of, meals and times, and it was just journaling hell. It was like the worst kind of journal. I remember happily burning it many years later because I was just so ready to get rid of that memory. Yeah, it was a pretty tough time, but I did find La Lechele, and I got amazing support from a bunch of people there, incredible support. I actually felt really seen and really looked after. There was an incredible leader at the time who just was so empathetic to me and amazing. And I also found you, and I was coming along to home birth coffee groups, and there was a lot of overlap between those two groups of mothers and families as well, which was really cool. We made a little circle of good folks, and I started learning a lot. Like, I started really understanding breastfeeding far too late. But I learned some really useful things about how to feed my baby in a way that felt kind of aligned to the parenting that we were wanting to do. So I really wasn't really keen on scheduled feeding. And I remember, I think it was from a UK article, or it could have just been a UK tip, that you could quite safely feed your baby formula milk from the fridge at fridge temperature. If your baby could get used to it, that would be fine. And so it was a really useful way to sort of demand feed him and mimic the fact that he could feed whenever he wanted to. He didn't have to wait for a bottle to be heated and so on and so on. So I was doing as many concessions and trade-offs as I could find, because we had stopped the donor milk at about 6 weeks. And so he then became mixed fed from formula. And then at about 5.5 months, I stopped feeding him and he went to formula only. And so yeah, he was demand fed cold milk from a bottle, and it felt less wasteful. It felt like I didn't have to tip away the feed that he didn't finish because it had been heated and I couldn't let it cool, and little things like that. Yeah, so, and then eventually time passes.
Can I ask where that decision to stop breastfeeding him at 5.5 months came from? That question, and also when you're in home birth circles, right? Like, there's a particular sort of mindset that is common to home birthers around things like breastfeeding, doing things the natural way. I just wonder if you felt any judgment or shame around bottle feeding your boy formula when you were mixing with these circles of, crunchy mums.
The decision to stop feeding him was mine because he wasn't actually particularly interested in feeding from me. And it was emotionally difficult to continue to keep trying when it was really clear that his nutrition was coming from the bottle. And so I just stopped, and I was gutted and guilty to do that, but it was me. And I didn't need anyone's help feeling ashamed. I was doing a great job of making myself feel ashamed. And I was judging myself, and I was doing a lot of things that are very unfair to myself, I see in hindsight. I wasn't aware of anyone at all overtly sharing that judgment. in those circles and in those sorts of coffee groups or picnics and La Leche meetings. I was the only bottle feeding mother at a La Leche meeting every single month. But that group was incredibly supportive, and they understood what I'd been through. They'd seen me crumble the very first meeting I arrived with this, this huge problem that I could not solve on my own. And I think in lots of ways they felt really okay with me being there as a bottle feeding mum, because they understood everything I'd tried. I think they understood that I was wanting to learn as much as I could about what exactly happened to me. Not that you ever really get answers and absolutes on these things. And yeah, like I said, I loaded every negative feeling on myself. I didn't need anyone's help. So no, the circles I was in, they weren't like so crunchy. So funny as interesting adjective. No, I didn't feel that. I felt a lot of love and a lot of support. And I can't say that I let it all in and I let myself feel better. I just felt crap about it for a really long time. To be, as you can see, it's one of those parts of the story that's still very raw.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm pleased you didn't feel any sort of judgment or
No,
in those circles, because I was usually part of those circles.
it was probably the opposite, Carla. It was probably
Yes.
more that when I would see mothers feeding, I'd feel so happy for them, and like I could instinctively recognize the incredible connection that you can have with a baby from breastfeeding. And obviously I wanted that for myself and for my boy as much as I could. So then the grief returns that's not how our story has played out. It was probably more from other circles, more of the mainstream circles, which, remember, was really our major reality. We sort of found other people who'd home birthed after we had home birthed ourselves. But it's more of those mainstream circles where people are at pains to just make you feel okay about formula feeding. Would there be, like, oh, fed is best, and now, at least now he's sleeping and you can rest, and Sean can feed him now, and that's so good. And it was that pissed me off more than anything. I just got, because it just felt really minimizing of how I was feeling, and I didn't need to hear any of that. Like, I didn't want, but it's really hard to just say, shut up, like, yeah. So I found that much harder than the breastfeeding and the home birthing circles, Carla.
It's the same, but in a different context, as that comment that people make after somebody's experienced a traumatic birth of, at least you got a healthy baby, it could have been worse. Like, count your blessings, look at the bright side.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was that, and I know how unhelpful that is, because I also experienced, as I said, that empathetic La Leche leader who just silently let me crumble at a meeting and did no rescuing. She did not leap in. She literally just vibed with me across the room. And then afterwards, she gently said, if there is something I can offer, would you like me to send you an email? Would that be a helpful way to receive a few things after you come here to join us today for this meeting? She was just exemplary at like how to handle someone who's going through a really tough time and gets it. She was phenomenal, and there she was at a La Leche meeting, not at all, no, a stranger. So I feel really lucky that I found those groups. They were a big part of how we spent the first year, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. So perhaps now share with us yeah, your thoughts around having another baby. I don't know if Willis was planned or.
Yeah, he was. He was. I was really keen to go on maternity leave again. So I was I was counting the months and calculating when that could happen and when we should, try to conceive a second child. And that all worked out like clockwork. And then we had another very uncomplicated, very healthy pregnancy. And we had a toddler in the mix, or, like a baby becoming a toddler. And so the boys are 2 years and 1 month apart. And second pregnancy, I stayed healthier in that I was more conscious of my diet, and I was really busy with a toddler, and I was back at work. There was some stress at work in the second pregnancy, and I was made redundant. So I knew that I was leaving a job at the end of and when I went on parental leave, I knew that there wasn't really parental leave. I wasn't coming back. So that was there. But the pregnancy itself went well. I was again really active and moving around. We had a really interesting situation, which I think is probably good to cover. Well, obviously you were part of our birth planning, because by that time I knew that you might be a great person to invite over when labour did get started, to hang out with Beren and just sort of be another somebody for company in the household. And obviously we were with Dee again as our midwife, happily. I don't know if you remember this, but at 41 weeks, again, I'd gone past 40. At 41 weeks, Beren got hand, foot, and mouth from placenta. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was really interesting. It was good to remind myself of this. So at that time, we were doing quite a lot of work with Dee around what does that situation need us to do in response. We were having conversations like, would I actually leave the house and birth at a birth center to mean that our toddler could be comfortable and, wouldn't have to sort of go away? We were worried about, was there any risk there from infection with, birthing a newborn into a home environment that's got a virus present? Dee was consulting with pediatrics, and we were sort of figuring lots of advice out. We were seeing a homeopath who was trying to support Beren to, process that virus quickly and feel well. We were also toying with the idea of should we remove Beren from the home environment, and so he wouldn't get to see his sibling be born, so that I could still home birth. What will we do? So quite a lot of stuff going on at 41 weeks. And happily, he went crusty, which is was the agreed indicator that we knew that he was not going to be infectious, and there was going to be no sort of like wet spots to worry about. He went crusty, and I literally gave birth the next day. So Willis was born at precisely 42 weeks, or whatever that means to babies don't check the calendar, but he was born at 42 weeks. And nothing had to change. So I got to birth in a different room of the house, which was fun. And Beren got to see his brother being born. Again, another baby was on the way. We had no idea whether we were having a boy or a girl. And we got to meet Willis. I remember the labor being different. It was a little faster, but not rapid. And it was intense in an entirely new way. So I had no idea what to expect. And whilst pregnant for the second time, people had said things to me like, what will you do if it's another breech baby? And I thought that was a really strange question, because I know how to birth a breech baby. So I felt like saying, well, that'll be fine, because I've done that. It was more that I didn't know what to expect from another labor. So this time I had a real transition, and I remember absolutely feeling like I had gone past my limits and that I could not do this. And I remember being in the pool and just having like a little sob to myself and feeling like, oh my God, I've got to say out loud, I can't do this. I don't want to be here. Let's go. And I remember feeling like I can't say that. I'm a home birther. Like I shouldn't be able to do this. And then, boom, he was crowning. So at that point, I had that full experience of a really intense. Okay, I don't remember pushing Willis. I just remember labor that absolutely mounted and grew, and contractions that absolutely overwhelmed me in the pool, and reaching that point where, as they say, that classic sort of like, I can't do this anymore, and then boom, we've got a head. And I remember feeling his head, feeling hair floating around in the water, because I was in the pool this time, and just suddenly popping back out and being all chatty, and like, I'm back in the room, everybody, and like I can feel his head. And I can't remember what you can remember, but I know.
Yeah, I might just say at this point, because yeah, when it must have been that time of, there was the transition phase that you talked about, and then you said, and then orphan as head was there. So I was there for that with Beren. So we'd been down in the lounge, and you were down in the bedroom in the birth pool, and you let out an almighty like roar or sound. I can't remember if it was a scream or a roar, but it was like Beren was like, "Oh, what's going on? I want to go and what's going on with mum?" And so we went down, and yeah, and there you were in the pool, and he sat up on, I think maybe he came around to the pool edge with dad for a while, but then he came and just sat on my lap on the bed, and we just watched as the rest of your boy was being born. And I remember you saying, was it you or was it, yeah, you saying, I can feel an ear, I can feel this soft little ear. It was just so beautiful. It was such a buzz to be there. Yeah.
It was after that point, it was super cool. But yeah, I had forgotten the roar. It was definitely not a scream. It was really guttural, and it came from somewhere really deep, because I remember my throat feeling quite hoarse, and like I'd really worked my voice. And yeah, we had, everything that we had wanted for Beren meeting his sibling was just, it was so incredible for us as a family. He was, he was really ready to see a baby born. We'd done a lot of work to talk with him really openly. So, a way of life that continues to this day. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do to, after his sibling was born, he knew that he wanted to, cut the cord with dad. And he was super curious and involved, showed absolutely no distress, was really aware that I was going to make noises. We'd done loads of mooing, we'd read Hello Baby 5,000 times. We were really ready. And he was just gorgeous. He was such a perfect part of the welcoming party, and it was gorgeous for Sean. I'm glad you were there too. I know it meant a lot to Dee. I remember she was really emotional after he was born, because she said she'd really needed to see a birth like that. Maybe she'd had some other births more recently that hadn't been like that at all. And I know she just got all of the oxytocin topped up at Willis's birth. And yeah, and this baby was born, and I remember another giant boy. And yeah, we were in the pool, and then I think we had the birthed the placenta on the couch. Great photos this time. Just a lot more was organized, because we had a lot more knowledge. And he was even bigger than his brother. He was 4.7 kgs, and no tear with Willis's birth, just a kind of like a graze at the back of my vagina. So really easy healing from him. And And he was just a different baby. He was way more interested in feeding immediately. And so that was cool. That felt really exciting. Um, yeah, it was a completely different birth. It
I
took
seem
me,
to I seem to remember a beautiful moment before the cord cutting where did you read something or did Sean read something? And you were quite emotional as it was being read. It was this beautiful, yeah, about the placenta. Yeah.
yeah. Do you know, that's lovely. It's a bit vague, but I had found a piece of writing about the placenta, and I don't know who read it either. But yeah, I'd have to really work hard to find that piece of writing again. But it was the kind of thing, I guess, that we built in a little bit more to it because we had, all been working towards this pregnancy with Beren as well. Yeah, it's good that you remember that. I'd forgotten. Yeah.
It was a beautiful moment. I
We did a
remember it.
placenta print as well. We did do a placenta print. Um, Pretty sure that was Willis's placenta. Maybe we did one with both boys. I don't even know if we've still got them. That's terrible. Anyway, um, yeah, it was cool. It was really cool. Um, and it makes your house feel so special. I've birthed in two places. Yeah, our house is pretty cool. It's got a lot of love sort of built into it, from those experiences.
Yeah. So talk us through your breastfeeding journey with Willis.
Yes, well, it was sort of same but different. It was he was a different baby, and he was far more interested in the breast. And when he latched, I felt like he'd latched, and I felt like I knew more about the latch, full stop, because when I'd birthed Beren and then was learning to feed Beren, I was working with zero knowledge. And now, 2 years later, I had read The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, and I had been to La Leche League meetings, consistently. And I was really excited about this second attempt, and was kind of hopeful that it would be really different and that my milk would come in and so the early signs were really good, and I was trying to listen for swallows, and I was just almost like a amateur lactation consultant on myself. But by day 5, we were seeing the same signs. So I knew then I was looking at nappies, and I was looking for urine, but I was seeing urates, like I was seeing crystal sort of evidence in his nappies, not nice, wet, heavy nappies. And yeah, day 5, I knew, okay, it's not happening. But I had colostrum from a friend in the freezer, a lot, because she made a lot, and there was no question that we were gonna have to give him 20 mils of formula. We were really ready, so we just activated all the networks. And like I said, I had a friend who'd already given me colostrum. She had a baby about the same age, and so she was happy to share milk. And then I had other people sharing milk, and we went into mixed feeding. But with Willis, it was really different because he actually latched in a way that he was really happy at the breast. So we did tube feeding, and we didn't use a bottle. I knew then about nipple confusion, and I knew that if I offered him a bottle as a way to top him up, I was going to really risk the chance that he would want to return to my breast and feed. And I made a couple of big calls of my own. I knew that I wanted I knew that I wanted Willis to be drinking human breast milk as the priority. And I knew by then that formula was sort of like the 4th way in a hierarchy of ideal ways to feed a baby. And I also knew that I wanted him to drink every single drop of milk that my body could make. And I also knew that I did not want to pump. I had hated pumping because it felt like it felt pointless because my pumping just created so little return. I couldn't do it again. Didn't want to do it again. So I knew, okay, this baby's going to feed on me, and he's going to have the breast whenever he wants it, because that is the very best way for him to give my body signals that he wants it to make milk. So I knew heaps, but I was still dealing with low supply, and I was still going through some grief, but I didn't have as much time to grieve because I was busy. Like, I had a baby and a toddler, and you just I couldn't allow myself the same emotional response. I think I just got really productive and busy with solutions. So yeah, tube feeding turned out to be really successful. And he would sort of be latched on me, and I would just kind of like nudge the tube in, try and not break his latch too much. And then he'd be, actually receiving milk from a little pot of donor milk. I kind of boogied up my own sort of homemade system. Didn't bother with all of that taping the tube against the skin with all the soft medical tapes. Didn't bother with the necklace and the thing that holds the bottle there neatly. That was all like, you needed 18 hands to kind of get that all set up when you had a moment to sit down and feed the baby. So I just was quite rugged with my system, and I would just kind of balance a little pot of milk somewhere and then like quickly get the tube in, and just, it was quite not ideal. I suppose not all mothers would want to buy the proper system, and it did have a system. But I didn't end up using it. It just felt really clunky. And I would also try to not have to use that supplementary feeding system when we were out as much as we could, because it was just faff. So I would sort of mainly use it in the home. And I fed Willis all the time. He was really happy to feed from both breasts. He fed in the carrier. We were baby carrier fanatics by that time anyway, with both boys. But he was like a rock star. He would feed while we were walking to play center, while I was pushing a pram. He would feed, wherever we were. He would just kind of hop on in the carrier, walking around the house or making dinner. So I just let that boy feed, and he loved it. He was so happy. And it was great. And I just felt this completely different connection to myself as a mother and to my son. And that obviously was grief-full, because it reminded me that we hadn't been able to do that, Beren and I. But it was a really healing experience, because he was just so delighted to feed. And as he aged, we got to a place where we let the donor milk go, and he was eating solids, and then it was just me and him and food. And that felt so triumphant. I felt like I'd cracked it. And even though I know that he wasn't getting a great deal of volume, he was getting incredibly important nutrients and such important connection time. And I was able to sort of soothe him and mother him in a way that I hadn't had that tool in the toolkit. So I was definitely learning so much more about breastfeeding being far more than just food delivery system. It was absolutely a parenting tool. And yeah, he and I, we had a feeding relationship until he was like 22 months old.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was, yeah, I really got there, really got somewhere great with that second time round. Yeah.
Such such a powerful story. And I loved that you gave the gift of sharing that story in written format. You might have written that story for the home birth magazine that we were putting out at that time. I'm not sure, but regardless, you happily shared it with me, and it's a story that I've passed on to very, numerous women over the years who have had struggled with breastfeeding themselves, or their first experience was low milk supply. And it's so encouraging, isn't it, to hear these stories of people who have been through similar and become empowered and healed through the process. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I also loved hearing you share about the honoring of your needs in this breastfeeding relationship, that you weren't going to pump, and that would have been what I'm sure all the experts would have been encouraging you to do. If you want to build your supply, you've got to pump. And you knew that wasn't for you. And I love that you honored your needs, because look, when we're doing shit that we hate, that's stressing us out, that does nothing for building milk supply, right? And
No.
if you had been pumping, Willis possibly wouldn't have been at the breast as much, like it's, and he's the pump instead, and perfect.
And that's what it was. I think because he was such a happy feeder, I just kind of also knew he's doing the work of a pump. If he'd been a slightly more reluctant feeder, maybe I would have had to give it another go and pump. But it just seemed inefficient to feed him and pump. Just I was, yeah, wow, yeah, we bed shared, he fed, it just felt like I was feeding that child a lot. But yeah, really happy memories. It was really beautiful until it just became, I have some slight regrets about the way we ended our feeding relationship, and I was just over it, and it wasn't perhaps as planned and steady a decline as it could. I could have managed it better, maybe. I just kind of reached my wit's end one day. But I'm proud of 22 months.
Yeah, so you should be. What a
Yeah.
legend.
Yeah. And I just was in a completely different informed space. Yeah, amazing community of women out there as well who have oversupply. Like this there really is enough for everyone. And knowing that you can tap into that is a very humbling experience when you're a mother that is facing undersupply or low supply. Yeah, it's another sort of part of it that just blew us away as a family. Yeah, some special people who helped feed my kids. It's amazing. Be so grateful for that forever.
What would you say Sean's role was in helping you get through the struggles of breastfeeding Beren and then the journey of breastfeeding Willis?
I think he felt useful when he had jobs to do as like the milkman and going collecting donor milk locally. But he also felt probably quite powerless with Beren because there was not a great deal that he could do, and that's a tough spot for fathers. He definitely didn't add his own thinking. That's what he's so excellent at, is just support for whatever the day needs, rather than saying, hey, look, I think that we should just switch to formula because it seems easier. He would never, he didn't, and he wouldn't influence the situation like that. He's got a good read on it's not really my call here. I'm just going to be here for my wife and just do what I can as a father. With Willis, it was, I was in a better place and I was figuring it out and, running around with 2 kids and doing play center and picking up milk. And it was all more like I had it under control. And so he just did the things that, all good fathers and partners do, really. It's just kind of help run the house. When I needed to sit down with Willis, he made sure that was possible. And yeah, he's a true sort of 50-50 partner in the parenting bizzo. So we kind of got to grips with all the things that go into a family life with 2 kids. And yeah, I don't remember him doing specific things to support the feeding with Willis. He certainly never had any issue with, oh wow, suddenly we've got a baby that's still feeding. Oh, you're still, he had nothing to say about that. And there would have been people around us who would have been like, she's still feeding that baby. But I felt delighted that I was still feeding my baby. And I would have taken it from no one who would have had anything to say about that. I would have quickly nipped that in the bud. And yeah, there was never any anything from Sean about the length of the breastfeeding journey and the nature of the breastfeeding journey. He was just as pumped as I was that we were getting this together now. Cool. And he knew that I had done my very best with Beren as well. So it was, yeah.
Do you have any parting wisdom for anybody who's listening who is pregnant with their first baby and wanting to plan a positive and empowering birth and breastfeeding postpartum journey?
I think in hindsight, I think that I ended up with a great team of support. And I guess if you can sort of build that, if you think you know what that needs to look like, then just put it in place. So, you know, if you aren't mad about your midwife, or you have any inklings that maybe this partnership isn't as it should be, switch, change, make it feel right, make it feel better and closer to what you need. Same goes for anyone that's kind of in partnership or relationship with you, really, in relation to what you want your birth to end up like. It's good to kind of really sit with your own thinking about birth, and kind of screw what everybody else says, sort of thing, because it's so personal and it's so different for everyone. And I guess I didn't realize until probably Willis's birth, but the breastfeeding had parts of it too, that you're not gonna be in control of everything. There's a big degree of surrender, like you have to let it go. And Willis's birth took me right to that place. And then breastfeeding definitely taught me that you can't control for everything. And yeah, I guess also I would really recommend that women who want to follow their birth with a breastfeeding experience, that they become as informed as possible about what they can do to sort of get that off to a good start, because I sure needed a lot of help. And I think it's just really easy for when you do hit a little problem or a little wobble, you need a lot of support around you. And it's kind of different to birthing in that birth's sort of like an event, but breastfeeding for me just felt like this all-consuming reality daily. And I hadn't really thought about that. I hadn't factored that. So yeah, I guess I would, in hindsight, if I could go back, I would have done a lot more to sort of prepare myself to understand breastfeeding. Yeah, those would be my tips.
Yeah, you mentioned The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, which is an awesome book that has been around for a long time. You talked about going to La Leche League meetings after Beren was born. I know that my mum tells the story of going to her first La Leche League meetings when she found out she was pregnant with her first. So I'm unsure whether most cities, most places still have, you know, regular meetups for La Leche League. I'm sure that certainly some do. And that's an option, you know, that's a beautiful place to learn about breastfeeding and to connect with other mothers who are, you know, have babies at similar ages and stages, and to just find some support from, yeah, from people who get this stuff. And yeah, yeah, isn't it interesting, this sort of paradox where in order to feel the most in control in your birth, you need to relinquish control. And the way that we are able to fully surrender and relinquish that control and accept that we can't, you know, control how our birth is playing out, is through setting ourselves up to feel as safe as possible. And safety, I mean, in the holistic sense, you know, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally safe. And that looks like, as you described, having a support team that you trust, and who trust you, who trust your process. It's if you don't have full trust in your ability as a woman to give birth without these interventions, vaginal examinations, and going into the hospital and having the scans and this and that, then do some learning. And so yeah, do some unpacking around your fears there, and also some learning about physiology. How do you get those good hormones flowing? And you know, isn't it interesting that you had this 2nd-degree tear, and you were confronted with what most people would describe as a bit of a whoa, like moment in your birth of, you know, your baby's breech, and we need you to make a call now, Michelle, whether we call an ambulance and you go and birth your baby in the hospital, or whether you stay here and continue birthing at home. For most people, that would be quite a frightening thing to hear. And for most people, it would probably be quite painful to experience a tear. But when we have all these amazing hormones, when we are sinking into our trust in birth, when we are sinking into the process and surrendering it to it all, that just encourages more of these helpful hormones, more oxytocin, more endorphins, which are our naturally produced like painkillers, opiates, that when we experience these things that might ordinarily be frightening or painful, we have this like beautiful inner support system going on that enables us to get through those things in a remarkably different way to if we had been in fear, and if we had, you know, been terrified about relinquishing the control of our experience. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly with Beren's birth, I honestly just, I can't explain exactly why, but I just felt so incredibly certain, which is really remarkable actually for having been my first birth. I just knew somehow. I just knew that we're just going to stay here, all is well. We're going to have this baby right here on the floor. Yeah, I did really trust the room, and I felt their support, and absolutely it was an unhindered experience that let me feel my own power, which was yeah, an amazing gift. Amazing.
Yeah. And I wonder how different it all would have been if you had, like, you didn't have scans, you know. And I hear just countless stories these days of women who are going for these growth scans at the end of their pregnancies and being told, oh, your baby's big and you might, you know, induction is looking like it. it will be the safest option, because what if your baby gets stuck? And so, Beren was a big baby.
I think
And
about that too, Carla.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think about that. And there's a huge degree of ignorance was bliss, because I didn't have to decide what to do about my breech baby earlier than him being like 1 inch away from fresh air.
yes,
It really, I mean, it was a true blessing, I think, that he was completely engaged and we were like right at the finish line when we all discovered that that was the truth of it. I think there'd been a hunch in the room from the midwife and the second midwife, but I had no scan. I didn't have to think about, shall we try and turn him, or he's very large. My mind was not polluted with thinking and information inputs before the day that I went into labor. I had a massive bump, and I had a strong feeling that we were going to meet our son, and that's it. And I just knew that I'd go into labor and have this baby. I just felt really certain. So yeah, there is something in that as well. I also do look around at the practice of scanning now, and I think I would have found that a much harder end of pregnancy. Yeah, but again, they're a choice. They don't have to happen.
it also helped undoubtedly that you had the midwife, as you talked about at the start, that you had, and that she was confident in supporting you to birth your breech baby at home.
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't let the fear come in and, call the ambulance. And
Oh no, no.
yeah,
Yeah, she had my back in that. She believed in my response. She believed that I was responding from a place of truth. And yeah, and we worked hard to birth that baby. Like we got him out when we knew we needed to, get this baby born. Let's have him. And we did. Yeah, I don't think I was sort of relaxed about it. The room was not relaxed, but yeah, we pushed on and we met our boy. Yeah,
pushed on. You sure did.
sure did.
Love it. Oh, Michelle, it has been such a gift to get to hear these stories again and to relive my part as well in Willis's birth. It was such a beautiful thing to be a part of. And yeah, just to remember the good old times as well. You and I, we used to spend a lot of time together. We don't see much
Sure
of each
did.
other these days.
No. Look, it was so fun for me too. Thank you so much for making it possible to put it in this format and talk it all through. It was cool just to go back over it for me as well. It was really fun.